Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is longing to be extroverted healthy for introverts? Another related question, can I analyze the concept of extraversion-deficit belief? Now, extroversion is a socially desirable trait, which has led some people who are low in extroversion to believe that they have a deficit in extroversion as opposed to feeling comfortable with their introversion. So essentially, some introverts believe they need to be more extroverted. This is where we get the term extraversion-deficit belief. When I talk about this idea that somebody would want to be at a different level on this particular personality trait, it's important to keep in mind that extroversion isn't the only personality trait where we see this effect. So before I take a look at extroversion specifically, I'm going to take a general look here at all of the 5 personality traits. So when I conceptualize personality, I typically use the 5-factor model. I remember this model through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So in looking at these 5 traits, we can see where some deficit beliefs might occur. I usually think about this in terms of statements that start with the words I wish, like I wish I was one way as opposed to another. How often do we hear these types of statements in relation to each personality trait? So starting with openness to experience, people who are low in openness typically do not have a desire to be high in openness. And the opposite is true as well. Highly open people don't want to be less open. Ironically, people who are very low in openness would not believe that the trait is real. They don't tend to believe in theories that involve abstraction, right? So with low openness, it might not even be a matter of not wanting to be higher on openness. It might be a matter of not believing that openness to experience or any personality trait really exists. Now, this really makes sense in terms of the I wish statements we tend to hear in clinical practice and in the general population. We don't really hear people too often saying something like, I wish I could appreciate art more, or I wish I could fantasize more. And we don't tend to hear the opposite either. I wish I didn't appreciate art, or I wish I would fantasize less. Now, moving to conscientiousness, highly conscientious people almost never desire to be low in conscientiousness. I think the very nature of high conscientiousness prevents this desire. I don't often hear people say, I wish I wasn't so well organized. I wish I was late to work more often, right? Those aren't popular statements. Although I have heard people say, I wish I could be more spontaneous. So in that way, we would see a move from high conscientiousness to low conscientiousness. Now, sometimes people low in conscientiousness wish they could have a higher level of this trait. I wish I could finish a task that I started. I wish I had a better work ethic. I wish I could be more productive. So we tend to see that direction moving to higher conscientiousness more often than moving toward low conscientiousness. Now, moving to extroversion, I'll just take a quick look at it here, and I'll break this trait down in more detail later on in this video. So I talked about the extraversion deficit belief, but what about the other way? Do people who are extroverted ever desire to be introverted? I really haven't seen much evidence of that. I've never heard of introversion deficit belief, for instance. We don't hear people say, I wish I wasn't friendly, or I wasn't outgoing. I wish I had fewer positive emotions, right? So something like, I'm tired of being so happy, right? You just don't hear that very often. Even when people are literally tired of being too happy, like if somebody's in a manic state, you still wouldn't hear this particular statement. You wouldn't hear somebody say, I no longer want to be happy, right? That's one of the difficulties with mania. People who are manic don't want to seek treatment because they do feel really good, right? They feel better than they've ever felt before. So moving to agreeableness, people who are low in agreeableness, so disagreeable, rarely want to be agreeable. Although sometimes they recognize the social advantages that being agreeable might impart. So something like, I wish I could just get along with people better. Individuals who are highly agreeable sometimes do wish to have low agreeableness traits. I wish I could stand up for myself. I wish I could be more assertive when I know that I'm correct about something. So we see that when somebody's really high in trust and they really value cooperation, that can actually be a deficit sometimes. That can be perceived as something negative in certain situations. Now looking at the last trait in the 5-factor model, neuroticism. Individuals who have a low level of neuroticism rarely want to be more neurotic. Individuals who are highly neurotic often want to have lower neuroticism. I would say that out of all of the big 5 traits, this is the one where we see the greatest desire to have movement on that trait, specifically in one direction, from high to low. Which makes sense if we look at all of these statements we hear, beginning with the words I wish, that point toward this desire. I wish I didn't worry so much. I wish I had more resilience. I wish I was more emotionally stable. I wish I wouldn't react so much when people criticize me. I wish I was slow to anger. We almost never hear the opposite, right? We don't really hear people saying, I wish I had a temper that I could not control, right? That's just not something that people typically do. So that was an overview of the desire to change personality traits in general. So let's take a closer look at the trait of extroversion. Extroversion has 6 facets. All of the big 5 traits do. Now, specifically, the facets associated with extroversion are warmth, so being friendly and kind, gregariousness, so being talkative, spontaneous, and outgoing, assertiveness, being confident, enthusiastic, aggressive, and dominating, activity, so somebody being energetic, always wanting to be busy, in a hurry, excitement-seeking, being adventurous, courageous, and bold, and positive emotions, when somebody is optimistic, cheerful, and happy. Now, these facets do tend to move together. For example, if somebody's energetic, they would tend to be excitement-seeking. But they can also move independently. So somebody could be quite friendly, but not be outgoing. Or someone could be energetic and want to remain busy, but not be optimistic or happy. Now, although there are socially desirable directions with all of the personality traits, so specifically high openness, high conscientiousness, high agreeableness, and low neuroticism, high extroversion really stands out as being favored by society. This is an easily recognizable trait that a lot of people understand and a lot of people want to be extroverted. In a recent study using a sample from the United States, we see that 87% of people expressed a specific goal of becoming more extroverted. So we see here that both introverts and extroverts want to become more extroverted. We also see in a study that had almost 19,000 participants, extroverts reported feeling more normal than introverts, and they reported feeling that they had a better fit with their peers. So in a sense, they believe that they fit into society a bit better than introverts. This pressure by society exists to such an extent, we now see this term, extrovert ideal. The idea here is that the extroverted self is the best version of oneself. Now, society puts a lot of pressure on introverts to adopt extroverted qualities. For example, one of the goals of many people in counseling is to have positive feelings like joy and contentment. We also see other goals of counseling line up with extroversion, like assertiveness training and trying to be more energetic. For somebody to be a mental health clinician, we see it's important to be friendly and kind, right? So there are a variety of pressures pushing on people to move toward extroversion. So in a sense, society really says that if introverts could just become more extroverted, they would fit in better with society. They would gain a greater sense of well-being and obtain a higher level of authenticity. We even see research supporting this idea that extroverts are more authentic than introverts. The conclusion that many draw from these findings is that introverts should become more extroverted, but that conclusion doesn't take into account the nature of authenticity. This is where I think the problem is with this particular reasoning. We know from prior research that authenticity tends to lead to a sense of well-being. So yes, authenticity is good, but authenticity doesn't come from having a certain personality trait. It comes from behaving in a way that is congruent with the personality that somebody already has. If somebody is true to themselves, if their behavior aligns with their personality, their level of authenticity is higher. We see that in society, the push to become more extroverted is consistent with this theory. Society's demands are actually saying that people who are introverted should behave in a way not consistent and not congruent with their personality. Society is essentially demanding that introverts be inauthentic. We see that the research literature actually supports my concern about this relationship between extroversion and authenticity. We see that introverts who don't have much of a desire to be extroverted, so they're not really feeling or responding to that pressure that society places on them, they show a higher level of authenticity. So these are extroverts who have low extraversion-deficit belief, right? They're not buying into, again, society's pressure. Introverts who have high extraversion-deficit belief feel inauthentic. Now, I mentioned before that extroverts can want to feel more extroverted as well, and actually that's fairly common. So they can have extraversion-deficit belief as well. We see in the research findings that this does not tend to affect their authenticity. So the negative effect only exists for introverts. Another interesting finding has to do with this concept of well-being. The argument behind becoming more extroverted is that it would lead to a higher level of well-being. As it turns out, introverts who have low extraversion deficit belief report a level of well-being that is fairly close to what extroverts report, although it's still not as high as what extroverts report. Introverts that have high extraversion deficit belief have lower levels of well-being. So this makes a lot of sense because authenticity tends to predict well-being, right? So this is fairly consistent with what we see in other findings. So what's the bottom line from this type of research? Well, at least when it comes to extroversion, giving in to society's pressure is not necessarily good for well-being. Now, this brings up an interesting argument. What about the argument that nobody should change anything about their personality? It seems to be supported in a way by these findings. So taken a step further, should people with personality disorders try to change their personality characteristics? If they do try to change them, in a sense, are they just being inauthentic? So I have 3 points here that can answer these questions. The first point, the research findings I discussed here are about extroversion, and even when talking about extroversion within a normal range. So these studies weren't looking at extremely high or extremely low extroversion. Also, these studies have nothing to do with trying to change other personality traits, other traits from the 5-factor model. The second point, these findings are talking about tendencies. For any particular individual, it might be a good idea to try to be more extroverted, or for that matter, to try to be less extroverted. My third point, personality disorders deal with dysfunction. If somebody has a personality disorder like borderline, narcissistic, paranoid, or avoidant personality disorder, their functioning is going to be limited by those extreme personality characteristics. Introversion, or low extroversion, is not maladaptive. It's just not as socially desirable as high extroversion. Both low and high extroversion have positive and negative qualities to them, right? So with these 3 points, we kind of see that if somebody has a personality disorder, it's still a good idea for them to seek treatment and try to become more functional. It could help them in the areas of relationships and career and other social functioning. So I know whenever I talk about topics like extroversion, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.